All right, a big story this hour. The race to find a killer in one of the ritziest towns in America. Just a few hours ago, police identified the woman found stuffed in a suitcase alongside a picturesque highway in Greenwich, Connecticut. The victim's name, Valerie Reyes, 24 years old. Her family reported her missing on Wednesday last week. She was last seen walking to a train station in New Rochelle. Now, that's 12 miles from Greenwich where the body was found. A local reporter tells HLN law enforcement is now focusing on uncovering the people who were in Valerie's life.
What they're really doing is looking at the people in her life because, as I'm sure most people know, women are 50% of female murder victims are usually killed by someone that they knew. So they're trying to just see who was in her life. We're pretty certain that it didn't happen in Greenwich. We have no idea where the murder happened at this point, but they're just kind of trying to piece this woman's life together and see who was in it.
And right now, Greenwich police are renewing their call to the community for help, asking anyone who saw anything suspicious in that area to reach out for tips. Our big questions today, the question, who killed Valerie Reyes and how are police going to track down her killer? Want to bring in a forensics expert, a certified death investigator and distinguished professor of applied forensics at Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan. Okay, the reporter there asked the good questions about who's in her life. You can hit on the forensics, i.e. the body found stuffed in a suitcase should be a treasure trove of evidence, shouldn't it?
Yeah, I would think so, Mike. The body is going to be in a self-contained area. You know, it doesn't get much better than that. Any kind of trace elements that are left behind that could be transferred from the potential killer, the environment in which she was killed, and, you know, anything that's kind of collected along the way, like DNA, fiber, hair, and even to a certain degree, fingerprints.
Got it. Here's a quote from Greenwich police along those same lines. Many pieces of possible physical evidence were collected. So again, that leads to that. If you come onto the scene as an investigator, what's the first thing you're looking for? Top priority, number one, to help solve this case?
Well, I mean, the first thing I'm going to want to look at is, you know, when you begin to take a look at this piece of luggage, which is striking in and of itself, I want to know the origins of this luggage. I want to know if there's any specific markings on it that tie it back to one specific element. Keep in mind, what we do for a living is all about connectivity. How can we connect things back? So even the finest little tiny detail, like DNA, that sort of thing, I want to be very, very careful. And hopefully, and I'm sure they have, taken great care with this piece of evidence.
Got it. So with that, you've got the body, clothing items. You mentioned it, the luggage. I mean, and all that ties back to the reporter's question of who's in her life potentially, right?
Yeah, because most of the time, Mike, as you well know, you've reported on these cases for years, is the idea of intimates, those individuals that are within your sphere, boyfriends, husbands, people of interest, say, for instance, who would have a beef against a young lady like this to do such great harm to her. Now, keep in mind, we still don't know the exact cause of death, but that's going to come back and play a huge part into this, how much passion is involved and how much work is involved here, Mike. This individual that did this had to have a space in which they felt comfortable in working, and to manipulate a body to get it inside of a suitcase is no easy undertaking, not to mention the body was bound, as the police have mentioned.
And real quick, you just mentioned it. The autopsy results are on the way. How does that potentially tell us who did this?
Yeah, I think that if we talk about things like strangulation, stabbing, cutting, this sort of thing, or even suffocation, those are very intimate events. That puts the individual in close proximity to the person. That's a big difference than saying shooting somebody at a distance, right? So that's going to be a specific tie back. And also these knots that are used to bind her hands and her feet that the police had mentioned from the very beginning. How complex are these knots? Does this look like something that an individual would be familiar with, that has had practice at doing? That's the troubling thing about this.
Got it. Joseph Scott Morgan, always appreciate your expertise. Thanks again.
Thank you, Mike.
Appreciate it.